Okay, so now I'd like to take some time to talk about sex and gender, which is, one of the biggest divisions that we have in society is between men and women because those are the only two things you have to pick from. And so unlike race and ethnicity, which we'll get to next week, sex and gender in many ways is easier to talk about because there's only two groups to really talk about, but in a lot of other ways it's harder to talk about simply because of the history that we're talking about here. So we'll get to more of this. So let's move on to actually talking about what sex and gender are. They're not the same thing. Sex is based on ascribed characteristics. You're born either male or female, with very few exceptions. People are either born with male sex organs and secondary sex characteristics, or you're born female with female sex organs and secondary sex characteristics. And so when you talk about a person's sex, that's based on their ascribed characteristics, how they're born, in other words. On the other hand, gender is learned. Gender is your identification with being male or female and with the roles that are being expected to play in society of being male or female. Males and females act very differently, and they have different roles in our society. And so I choose this picture because this is a person, this is a transgender pageant that's held every year in Thailand. And this is the person who won that title of Miss Transgender. And so this person is biologically, their sex is male, but as you can see, they identify with the gender roles of being female. So they are transgender, meaning they're male biologically, but female gender-wise. So gender is learned, and it's based on these characteristics, these roles that society tells us to play. And so this brings again into play, once again, that whole nature-nurture debate about are differences between men and women beyond the obvious physical ones, are those something you're born with, or are they something that are learned? In other words, does sex determine gender, or is it completely independent? And the genders that the things that we learn about what it means to be male or female in our society, are those totally determined by our culture rather than being determined by our biology? So it's a big question, do little girls naturally want to play with dolls, and do they naturally want to play with easy bake ovens? Or is that just something that we're taught? Do they naturally gravitate towards those things? Or is it just because as parents we start to push them that way? So what real sex differences are there? There are obvious biological differences between men and women, and there are biological imperatives. For instance, what I mean by that is only women can have children. And that brings into question the whole idea of motherhood. And is our modern idea of what it means to be a mother, are those based on these biological differences, that women are closer to infants? Is that based on the biology and the fact that women only can nurse, that men can't do that? Or do we just learn that along the way, that little girls learn how to be mothers from a very young age and little boys simply don't? And so it, again, brings into play and into question, are these biological imperatives, are these differences that we have between men and women, do they lead to our behavior and the differences we see, or is that all an illusion that society creates for us, these differences? Is there such a thing as maternal instinct? Instinct, if you remember, are things that you're born with. They're not learned. They're biological. Are little girls born with the instinct to know how to take care of children? That's something that the nature-nurture people debate all the time. Do we just spend, it's hard to say because we start being socialized into our gender from such a young age. We give little girls dolls from the time they're my little girl's age, not even 2. She's already learning what a baby is and how to hold a baby and, playing with a baby doll. And so who's to say, how do we know whether those things are natural, whether they're instinctual, or whether they're learned? There do seem to be some real differences in brain order between men and women. We can hook people up to sensitive electrodes and then look at different parts of their brain and which parts of their brain light up when they're doing certain activities. So for instance, if we're doing a math problem and we look at the brains of little boys and little girls, different areas of the brain seem to be being used by men versus women and by boys versus girls when they're doing math problems. That suggests that there is a real difference in brain order between men and women. Also, there seems to be a difference between men and women in their ability to recover from injuries to the brain. Men who suffer brain injuries and lose part of their brain, for instance, have to have a lobotomy and lose one hemisphere of their brain, that's gone forever. Men do not have the ability to regrow or to have different parts of the brain take over whatever that part of the brain was doing. So if your memory centers as a male are damaged, those memories are gone forever. And you may not even be able to ever have memories again beyond short term. But with women who suffer brain injuries, they're able to actually grow, if you will, new parts of the brain that duplicate those functions that were being done by the part that was lost. And so women are able to recover from brain injuries more than men are and function normally. That's another, seems to be inborn difference. Obviously, our brain doesn't learn how to do that from society. That seems to be a real biological difference. Also, there's a lot of debate about spatial versus verbal skills and how boys are better naturally at spatial things, maps, directions, geography, that sort of thing, puzzles. And girls are naturally better at verbal things, reading, vocabulary, speech, etc. And the debate here is that learned or is it instinctual? Are you born that way as little boys or little girls, or is it something that we learn from our society? We know from the brain order studies that little boys and little girls use different parts of their brain when doing problems, so there do seem to be differences, but it's very difficult to prove exactly where those differences in achievement in spatial versus verbal skills come from. Another area that's very much in debate is the math and science gap between boys and girls. That little boys have dominated the math and science fields, which tend to be more lucrative and lead to very important and high-paying jobs versus women. Whether or not that is an inborn difference between men and women, or whether it's something that we learn along the way and is a way that women are kept in subordinate positions, is very much a debate in sociology.